Hi guys! So today this is video number 2. Hopefully you've watched the first video about the window of tolerance, which can be helpful. This video we're going to talk about memory, and we'll eventually get into how that relates to trauma and how trauma memories are formed, and also how interventions can interact with that in order to help with symptoms of trauma when we have trauma memories. I'm Candy Jobert. This is Consider Hope Services, and I hope you find this information helpful. So the first thing we want to do is we want to talk about the 4 components of memory, which means there are 4 components of memory. Those components are images, emotions, thoughts or cognitions, and body sensations or sensory input. And we want to make sure that we include in body sensations all the sensations that we can actually have. So we've already covered images, but we also have our hearing and our sight, and not our sight, but our hearing, our smell, and our taste. But there's also things like pressure, temperature, and how those interact with all of those. And those types of things are being inputted all the time. 4 components of memory, right? The way that memory works is that we go through our day and our brain is constantly receiving this input. If we're conscious and awake, we're walking around, our brain is keeping track of, it is recording and making sense of what we are experiencing. And the 4 things that it does for those components that it's processing or storing and recording is our thoughts. So we always have, a train of thought kind of going through our minds. We have like the self-talk we might think about. We have emotions. So our emotional lives are very vibrant, most of us, even if we're not aware that our emotions are coming and going. If we take the time to record those and sit and kind of think about my day and the emotions that I experienced, you'd be surprised how many you're actually having. It's happening all the time. So the brain's recording that as well. Then we have our body sensations. So, for example, sitting here at a desk, I'm having all kinds of sensations. I'm sitting in a chair, so I can feel the pressure on the chair, my feet on the floor. The bright light of my little ring light for this video, and the other things in my room as well. My body is taking all of this in. I'm having these sensations, and my brain is keeping track of that, receiving that as information. And then finally, images. And images get into it. It's a whole different type of brain function for how our brain uses images, but it's really amazing. And we just want to make sure it's the one that we usually relate most to as far as memories go. Most of us, when we think of remembering something, what we think of is an image. We have a picture in our mind, or maybe a little bit of a movie or a series of images that to us is our memory. That's the memory that we have as a picture. So let's just keep that in mind. It's not always a picture, right? We have these other components with our memory. So we just want to remember that there are 4 components of memory, and that is working by us being conscious and awake. We're walking around, we're experiencing these things. The brain is receiving all of this input all the time. So what happens then? When we go to sleep at night, we have a period of our sleep called REM sleep, rapid eye movement. So you'll actually see if someone's eyes are closed, their eyes will move back and forth behind their eyelids. This period of sleep doesn't represent a huge period of sleep, as far as like if you slept 8 hours, you might have an hour of REM sleep. But it's a very, very important one, because what the brain is doing during this time, it is processing, we could say, like a computer, sorting this information that it has received all day. These 4 components that it has been kind of a deluge, right? Like all the body sensations and the images and the temperature and the light and the thoughts and emotions. That's a lot of information that's coming in that we've experienced, and the brain has to do something with that. So what the brain does with that is process it during REM sleep, make sense of it. We could get into a lot about how the brain does that exactly, but there's a couple of things that are good to know. One is that the brain filters all of the information it filters it by previous experiences. So you might hear a model of talking about memory that talks about the predictive brain model, or that's the working model, is that our brains actually take all these previous experiences, it forms predictions, it just expects things to go in a certain way based on having things go a certain way repeatedly over time. And the brain sort of takes that, and now it filters everything that took in today according to my prediction, and it does something with that. It makes sense of it and makes decisions basically on how to store information based on if it matches the past and the predictions that my brain is expecting, or if this is different, right? The other thing that the brain does is it stores information associatively. So, for example, if we take one component of memory, emotions. If I were today to experience the emotion of disappointment, it's possible that I might also experience remembering a loss or another big disappointment from my past, even though that thing is far removed from what's happening and isn't directly related to what I'm experiencing. But because the emotion is similar, the brain has that information stored associatively, so it can be called up or accessed when I experience the emotion today. I can experience similar memories, emotions, or components of memory from the associative, tied together kind of nature of memory. And when we talk about EMDR, we'll talk a little bit about physical storage and kind of what that looks like as far as the associations go. But it's important to remember. So we go through our day, we have all of these experiences. Our brain has to do something with all that information. What the brain does is get you to go to sleep, have you rest, and then process that, and it filters it and it stores it in an associative manner. So as far as storage goes, we want to think about this for a minute, is that the brain will put the information after processing, we'll put it into short-term storage, and then eventually into long-term storage. And that just takes time. Every person and different things can take different amounts of time. But for short-term storage, that might look like if somebody asks you, 2 weeks from now, what it was like to watch this video. You're probably going to be able to recall quite a few details, like the time of day, or you were hot, or you were cold, or hungry. Maybe you had a snack before you sat down to watch, or whatever that might look like. But if somebody were to ask you about what it was like to watch this video 8 months from now, you're going to be like, maybe I did. I don't remember. I don't remember any details. You won't recall much at all, unless there's something particularly that stands out about this video. But even then, you might not remember the video itself. You might just remember what you got from it or what you learned from it. So the details then have been moved into long-term storage, right? The brain has the information, but it's processed it, it moves it away, and then eventually kind of tucks it away into long-term storage. So short-term storage, we could look at that as sort of like, my brain has processed this information, put it in a file, and now I've got these files sitting in a storage box here on my desk. It's pretty easy for me to look over and go, oh, okay, I can pull out that file, I can access that information pretty quickly. Maybe I don't have all the details, but I've got most of it. I can tell you what those are. But long-term storage is more like this box sitting here has been taken downstairs into the basement, put into long-term storage room. The door's locked, right? It's put away, and it's probably covered in dust by this point. So the difference in accessing the information now means I have to go through quite a few hoops. I've got to get up. I've got to walk down a hallway, maybe go down some stairs, down another hallway, unlock the door, find the box, dust it off, right? Take the lid off, and then find the actual information that I'm looking for. So what happens is that most of the information that we receive in a day is kind of functionally forgotten, is kind of the way I say it. It's like we don't remember. For example, I'm sitting in a chair. As a licensed professional counselor, I sit in a chair all day with people, right? My mind does not need to remember what it's like to sit in the chair. So as far as the prediction my brain has, it knows exactly what it's like to sit in my chair. And it doesn't make a big fuss about that. It's not something that I'm going to have instant recall of, or it's important, right? It's not important. And so my brain's like, yep, this is exactly the same as every other day, filters it, puts it away, might not even keep that information, right? However, but with short-term storage, we're accessing it. It's pretty easy to access, right? It's still pretty handy. And whatever has been filtered or whatever's left that's important to keep is there. But long-term storage is harder. And it feels like most of what I've experienced has been completely forgotten, right? So by the time 8 months from now, it's kind of like, wow, I don't remember anything from that time when I watched that video and things like that. However, we know that a lot of the information is still there. It's just harder to access. So what that looks like in reality, we don't actually get up and go down to a storage room and find a file box to pull a memory up, but mentally we're sort of doing the same exercise. For example, someone might ask you, hey, do you remember that person from high school, that girl from high school? And you're like, okay, for me, an image of my high school pops into mind, and that's about it, right? That's as far as I've go. I've got an image of my high school. But if they keep talking and keep prompting me, then my brain will start working and start accessing the information that is stored associatively with that image of my high school. Okay, so now I'm at a time period. I've got other images around that time period. I might start having memories of the street and the Sonic that we got lunch at, and all these types of things. And as I begin to be prompted enough, maybe they say, remember, she drove a red car, she was short, she had dark hair, whatever they might say, is actually prompting me to kind of go into the archives, get in the basement, find that box, find the file. And I'm going to, or I might experience a situation where I'm like, oh, I recall, her name was so-and-so. She was my best friend's sister. They lived 2 streets over, or whatever that might look like. So functionally we forget, but the information's still there. What I'd like you to know about that is that in normal memory, we have these 4 components. It's very important when we start talking about trauma and how memory works. So we've got a lot of information being taken in. Our information is processed when we go to sleep at night, and then it is stored, either short-term or long-term, and eventually both. And most of the stuff we sort of feels like our experiences that we've forgotten it. But we know a lot of information is there. We just have to be prompted a lot to recall it. So this is how memory normally works. So what's the difference then in what we call a trauma memory? So with a trauma memory, usually this is going to happen. The way trauma memories are typically formed is when we have a shock to our system of some sort, along with a heightened emotion, like a really high emotion. And it's important when we start talking about trauma, people a lot of times will say like, well, I'm not very traumatized. I've never been in a car wreck. I'm not a soldier. No one's ever tried to kill me, right? Like maybe that's what I think of would be really traumatic. However, the way trauma memories are actually formed, that big emotion can also be embarrassment. It can be guilt. It can be fear, of course, that's what we usually think of. And it can also be grief. So we can have moments in time in the past where we have experienced a shock to our system with a big emotion that provides this trauma response in the body, basically. So now what we have happening is that usually we have our window of tolerance is overwhelmed. So in the previous video, we talked about our neurological window of tolerance. That's when my nervous system, we function day to day, we have ups and downs, that's life. But when I get a big shock, huge emotion, it might cause me to leave my window of tolerance in that my nervous system gets overwhelmed by the shock and by the emotion. And then my body initiates that full body protocol, fight, flight, freezing protocols. I get chemicals dumping in my body and doing all kinds of different things. And whenever that happens, suddenly we have conditions that are prime for memory processes to be interrupted or to be changed in a way. So now instead of my brain taking in these 4 bits of information and then processing them when I go to sleep at night and putting them into storage, it's possible because of the shock, because of the big emotion, for my brain to take the information or parts of it and sort of put it in a different place for storage just temporarily. It's kind of like the brain goes, hold on, I'm overwhelmed. My nervous system is overwhelmed. I've got this full body protocol going on. So this information that is coming in can be stuck kind of like, the movie with like put a pin in it or a sticky note kind of on the side of your brain. This has gotten stuck there because my body has prioritized my survival or my coping or whatever it is that needs to happen to get through this shock and big emotion. So now what happens with this information that's sort of been stuck here is that I go to sleep at night, and because the information was not set in my brain the way normal memory works, it is not processed. So I have REM sleep and most of my things are processed, but maybe whatever was stuck to the side is not. And if it's not processed, then it's not put into short-term memory. It's not put into long-term memory. It's not functionally forgotten, and it's not hard to recall it. So now this memory is kind of an outlier in my experiences. It's this thing that's sort of this information that's sort of stuck in this one particular spot, and it's not doing what most information does, what most memories do. And now instead of needing someone to prompt me over time or to have the experience where most of the details are gone but some of the stuff is still there, but I get prompted and I have to think about it and call it up, instead of that happening, now this memory, because it's not processed, is sitting there and it can be called up very easily. There's no circus I have to go through. I don't have to go to the basement. This one is just sitting there. And it can also be brought up, reminded of, by many of the things that are anything similar, right? So that might be a color or a sound or something that mimics or reminds my brain of that big shock, that big emotion, and whatever else was happening in that moment. And now suddenly it's calling up and it's being brought up. This distress, the shocking feeling to my system, any of the window of tolerance symptoms that I experienced, like if I had panic or heart rate, or if I had a nervous system shut down and a freeze, those things, because they were part of that experience, can be called up. So now I'm having symptoms of that trauma in day-to-day life. And maybe it's even 20 years, right? Because that memory is not ever processed. It's just sitting there. And it's easy to recall it. Doesn't take a lot. And now we're experiencing the associative storage, right? It does still associate things together, stored next to each other, but all those components are together. So if I had a big body response at the moment, then my brain has that stored with the image, with the emotion, with the thoughts, with the body sensations that happened in that traumatic event or occurrence, if you want to call it that. So now we can use the term triggered, right? When people use the word triggered, what they mean is that this traumatic memory is being recalled, reminded of, or prompted, if you will, and all of the distress that was stored with it or next to it is also being recalled. And the thing is, the more we experience, what does the brain do? If it does things a lot, then it gets faster at it. And if we keep getting this trauma memory called up by reminders in our environment, and we begin to experience a repeat of the distress and the emotion and this feeling of shock that happened when this thing happened, then now my window of tolerance is getting pushed a lot, right? It's happening more frequently, almost as if I were going through something similar every single time, because we actually are. So it is a little bit of when the memory gets recalled, a trauma memory gets recalled, if we're having these full body responses when that happens and the distress, then the brain starts to keep track that, oh, this is happening a lot. and it gets efficient at it. So now when it's recalled, my body might respond faster because my brain gets efficient at what it gets repeats of. And whenever we repeat that full body sensation or protocol or the panic or whatever that might look like for us, then my window of tolerance can actually become narrower because of the repeated exposure to what is essentially a memory, but a non-processed, poorly stored memory. So next time in our next video, we will talk a little bit about the trauma interventions that we use when it comes to these unprocessed memories, and our window of tolerance being sort of narrowed, and having these experiences. And we will also talk about the symptoms of PTSD and kind of how these things are all related to what's happening with our nervous system, our window of tolerance, and how trauma memories are formed. I hope this was helpful to you today, and I look forward to talking to you next time.